Disturbing degrees of separation. Have you ever played that game, 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon? You know the one I mean. The one in which you try to connect movie stars to Kevin Bacon using only 6 celebrities. I've always enjoyed playing that. In fact, I can connect myself to Kevin Bacon in less than 6 degrees. I have a really good friend named Travis, who was in a play with Catherine Bach. You might remember Catherine Bach as the actress who played Daisy Duke in the Dukes of Hazzard television show. Well, Catherine Bach was in Thunderbolt and Lightfoot with Clint Eastwood. Clint Eastwood was in Space Cowboys with Tommy Lee Jones. And Tommy Lee Jones was in JFK with Kevin Bacon. If I'm not mistaken, that gives me a Bacon number of 5. Fun, right? Well, I have a worse degree of separation to share with you today, and unfortunately, it's much closer to me than Kevin Bacon is. I've waffled back and forth over whether or not to actually tell this story, because people might take it the wrong way. This happened to a relative of mine, but I want to make it very clear that although he was a close blood relative, I was very young when this happened, and I didn't know him very well. So please, don't feel bad for me. What I'm going to do is just tell the story from my perspective. If you want the hard facts of the situation, when the ending is revealed, you will be able to look it up quite easily. The majority of my family, on both my dad's and my mom's side, lives in the Ohio, Kentucky, and West Virginia tri-state area. But there are a few of us, including myself, who have moved away. One of these people would have to be my maternal grandmother's brother, my great-uncle, David. He lived around the Georgia and Florida area. I didn't know him well, even though I was close and still am with my maternal grandmother's family. The only time I actually recall meeting him was when my family went to Disney World and we stayed the night at his house. During one visit to my grandma's house, I heard them talking about my Uncle David. I was sort of the kid who stayed indoors and liked to listen to adult conversation. In retrospect, it seems weird that they would talk about this in front of me because of my age at the time. But I listened, and I wondered. My family felt that he had a very domineering wife. My family did not care for her at all. This wasn't helped by the news that David had disappeared during a job, and he had been missing without contact for quite a while, according to what I heard. One thing that I remember quite clearly is that members of my family actually believed that his wife had something to do with his disappearance. I recall a comment about them saying she was very cavalier with the fact that she would eventually get life insurance money, and she would be using it to pay off her bills. It seemed weird that he was missing, but she already assumed he would be found dead. I recall this very clearly, and I remember thinking it was just a very cold attitude to have about your husband. During that time period, like now, I lived in the Chicago area. I was one of those other ones who didn't live in the tri-state area with the rest of my family. But we frequently went down to those areas to visit my grandmother all the time. It was the trip after that one in which I learned something that has grown into a more disturbing reality that has bothered me ever since. My great uncle David was found, or his body was found. But I learned that in actuality, his wife, the cavalier one who assumed that he would be dead, had absolutely nothing to do with his disappearance. My uncle, while he was out on his job, had picked up a female hitchhiker. Picking up that female hitchhiker had been the mistake that had cost my uncle, David Spears, his life. Because that hitchhiker was named Aileen Warnose. Hey y'all, Killer Orange Cat here. Feeling kinda heavy after telling that story, actually. I don't know how it will affect my listeners, but it completely sucked the energy from my body. I might have to watch a marathon of My Little Pony or something to feel good about the world again. Still, if you like this video, please let me know by hitting the like button. If you're not already subscribed to Killer Orange Cat, please just click the button next to the tabby to be informed of new content. Now, most of you know I like to do my videos in compilations of stories. However, I wanted to tell this story on its own. It's a very difficult story for me to tell, and even though I didn't know my uncle very well, it didn't make it any easier. And that's because I do know my grandmother very well, and I know many other people who knew my uncle well and loved him, and although the pain doesn't exist as much for me having not known him well, I've seen them go through pain, and pain is very real. Also, for those who don't know, this story affected my life a lot. I grew up with a very morbid fascination with serial killers, and my dream job at one point was actually to work as a serial killer profiler for the FBI. It was actually during some college work where I spent hours and hours of studying serial killer interviews that I found myself drinking a shit ton of vodka just to get through the projects. I decided then that it probably wasn't the right career for me, so I moved on. I do have one request. Please don't feel sorry for me. That is all I ask from you. Killer Orange Cat is a relatively happy guy who lives a relatively happy life. There are people out there, those involved in this case, and involved in other things, who have it a lot worse than I do. This story is the scariest thing that has ever happened in my life, but it's important to stress that it did not happen to me. It happened to my uncle and the people who knew him well, and they are the ones who truly deserve the sympathy. And please remember to make sure to check in your closet and check under your bed, because you never know where a killer orange cat might be hiding. Good night.